They've just had the conversation between the two leaders, and you heard their press statements. Subsequently, Honorable Prime Minister of Japan has delivered a lecture. To give us a sense of the ongoing visit, we have the privilege of having Foreign Secretary Sir with us, Shri Vinay Quatra. Also joining us on the dais, Shri Sibi George, our ambassador to Japan, as well as Dr. Shilpa Kambole, Joint Secretary, East Asia and EMO. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, and very good afternoon to friends from the media. Prime Minister of Japan, His Excellency Mr. Fumio Kishida, is on an official visit to India to meet with Honorable Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi ji. I would like to briefly explain to you the context of the visit, run through elements of the program, give you also a sense of discussion between the two leaders, and then touch upon briefly on a couple of outcomes from the meeting. As you are aware, relations with Japan have always occupied a very special place for India. Japan is one of the very few countries with which India has a system of annual summits. In 2014, Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi made his first bilateral visit outside India, immediate neighborhood, to Japan. During that visit, the India-Japan relationship was upgraded to a special strategic and global partnership. Guided by strong political will on both sides, the partnership has made significant progress in the last few years, covering the entire gamut of mutual engagement, as witnessed in the growing convergence of our political, strategic, and economic interests. In fact, Prime Minister Modi has referred to the India-Japan relationship as being one of the most natural partnership in the region. India-Japan special strategic and global partnership, built on the shared values of democracy, freedom, and respect for rule of law, is crucial for fostering peace, prosperity, and stability in the Indo-Pacific region. The last annual summit, that's the 14th annual summit, between Prime Minister Kishida and Honorable Prime Minister Modi took place in March of last year in New Delhi. Thereafter, in the past 1 year, the two Prime Ministers have met first in May 22 for the Quad Leader Summit in Tokyo, and then during the visit of Honorable Prime Minister Shri Modi to Japan to attend the state funeral of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in September last year. 2022 marked also the 70th anniversary of India-Japan diplomatic relations. We celebrated this momentous years through various events in India and Japan. 2023 is a pivotal year for both India and Japan as chairs of the two major international groupings. India as the president of the G20 and Japan as the chair of G7. Our countries have the unique opportunity of converging our priorities on issues of significance and drive through that and in the process the global agenda. Through G20 presidency, India is working with partner countries, including Japan, to provide greater voice to issues of interest to developing countries, in particular the countries of the Global South, about which we have spoken in the past briefings also. Very quickly, in terms of the program, Prime Minister Kishida arrived in New Delhi earlier this morning, went to Rajghat thereafter to pay his tribute to Mahatma Gandhi. The two Prime Ministers then arrived at Hyderabad House for delegation-level talks. The two leaders also delivered the press statements, which I'm sure you would have heard. It was followed by a restricted lunch meeting between the two Prime Ministers and their close associates. Thereafter, as you just recently watched and heard, Prime Minister Kishida delivered a speech upstairs a short while ago. The two Prime Ministers will later on visit the Buddha Jayanti Park, where they will visit the Bal Bodhi tree in the Buddha Jayanti Park. As per the current schedule, Prime Minister Kishida would be departing tomorrow morning. Through these talks, the two leaders have held substantive discussions which is corresponding and commensurate with the depth and expanse of India-Japan engagement. Key topics that were discussed during the meeting, key topics of bilateral cooperation, included the domain of defense and security, economic partnership, climate and energy, including energy transition, people-to-people exchanges, skill development, innovation. The two leaders also discussed regional issues of significance, including, as you just heard in the speech from Prime Minister Kishida, the Indo-Pacific. They also talked about their own respective priorities. Prime Minister explained at length India's priorities for G20, and he heard in turn Prime Minister Kishida's priority and Japan's priorities for G7. These two also formed an important component of bilateral conversation. In terms of concrete outcomes of the visit, there were two documents that were signed on the sidelines. One was the renewal of MOC, Memorandum of Cooperation, on Japanese language that was originally signed in 2017, essentially focusing on higher level language learning. And second document which was signed, was exchange of notes for the fourth tranche installment of JICA ODA loan of Japanese yen 300 billion on Mumbai-Ahmedabad high-speed railway project, roughly Indian rupees 18,000 crores. We also announced 2023 as India-Japan Year of Tourism. Prime Minister did express his desire with Prime Minister Kishida to declare the next year as the year of youth exchanges between the two countries. Ministry of Environment of Japan and Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change of India, they, besides these two agreements, also signed an aid memoir essentially on the joint crediting mechanism that has been under discussion for quite some time between the two countries. Prime Minister Kishida, as you all heard in the remarks by the two Prime Ministers to the press, invited Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi for the G7 summit in Hiroshima in May this year. Honorable PM has accepted the invitation. I would close here, and if there are any questions, we'll try and take them, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Please introduce yourself and the organization that you represent before asking the question. Let me begin with you, Yeshi. I saw your hand first.
This is Yeshi Seli from the New Indian Express. So PM Kishida had said that there are many unexploited regions in Northeast which could be collaborated upon. Can you elaborate a little on? And also, what are the joint exercises he's spoken about between the US, Japan, and India?
US, Japan, India.
Yeah.
Sorry, you had a question? Before you, please. Where did he mention this? In his talk? Okay, you just had the talk just now. We'll have to look at that.
Hi,
yes, please.
Hi, I'm Ryosuke Hanada from Japanese news agency Nikkei, and I would like to ask about the bullet train project. Did the two leaders agree on the schedule of the start of the schedule of the bullet train? Yeah, thank you.
Schedule of launch of the bullet train?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Siddhant?
Hi, sir, Siddhant from WION. My question is, was Chinese aggressiveness with India, with Japan, part of the conversation between the two prime ministers?
The other Siddhant? Same question? I love that. Okay, yeah. No, behind you. Yeah, go ahead. Huma?
Sir, I'm Huma Siddiqui from...
Microphone, not clear.
I'm Huma Siddiqui from the Financial Express. I just wanted to check in the defense. You talked about the two leaders discussing defense and security. So did they also talk about joint production, and did Japan offer any new technology to India as far as defense is concerned?
Offer new technology. I think we'll come round next round, so we'll just take 4 questions.
Okay. I usually couldn't quite capture the preciseness of your question on the joint exercises. My understanding is that what they spoke about was the we do multiple training programs as part of our bilateral and regional engagement. which is different from the training and exercises that we do in the field of defense. So I think what you're perhaps referring to is a set of recent exercises that took place between India and Japan, which I think for the first time also involved the two air force of the country. So I think that was a reference. Training, of course, is a larger issue in terms of capacity building, and depending upon the domain of the training cooperation that you would talk about, it would include different partners. In this case, the reference that you're making to US is perhaps relating to that. But I think the reference to the exercises that was made in the discussion was more about the joint India-Japan military exercises. In this case, the most recent being, I'm forgetting the name of it, but Veer Guardian, which is essentially involving Air Force exercises for the first time. On the Northeast question, you know, it is not something new. India and Japan have been talking about in the larger vision of Act East for us, in a sub-segment of how India and Japan can cooperate on this issue, which essentially strengthens 3-4 key aspects of regional, sub-regional and bilateral engagement, which links it through and through to as part of Act East. So there, for example, how do you build connectivity projects which link India's Northeast to, let's say, with the rest of the countries which fall under the Act East framework. Bangladesh is one of the very important partners there. Several of the projects that we are doing, for example, through Myanmar, multimodal Kaladan transport project, and other such road projects, bridge projects, which essentially link India through the rest of the Northeast, going further eastwards. This has been an ongoing point, not just of discussion between India and Japan, but frankly has been a point of substantive cooperation. We do an annual mechanism for this, and the next meeting of that mechanism is going to be held, if I'm not wrong, towards the end of next month, which is co-chaired by the Japanese ambassador here and Foreign Secretary as an institution from the Foreign Ministry. We essentially bring together all the stakeholders of the Northeast together and then see how partnership projects, including development cooperation projects, infrastructure cooperation projects, etc., can be sort of moved onto that. Now, with regard to the question on the bullet train, I think from a friend in Japanese media, I think there are many aspects of India-Japan cooperation when it comes to high-speed railway network. One is the project itself, and as I just mentioned to you, that the fourth tranche of the loan agreement between India and Japan was signed during this visit. Both leaders took an assessment of the current status of implementation of the project, which I think is progressing well. The leaders also assessed that this project is not only crucial to build industrial cooperation between the two countries, but also it has a very strong link with the technology cooperation between the two countries. I think the HSR project is not just a high-speed train project, it is also a very high-impact technology cooperation project. I think both leaders made that assessment and assessed the current status of its progress, which, as I said, has been progressing very well. Specific timelines of launch, etc., did not come up for the conversation between the two leaders. Siddhant, to your question on China, The two leaders, as I mentioned, during their luncheon meeting also spoke about the ongoing developments in our region and also globally. And naturally, as part of that, those discussions, they spoke about the challenges that we face in the region. 1, 2, how India and Japan and other like-minded countries can work together to address those challenges. 3, not just focus on challenges, but also focus on cooperation, particularly in the wider expanse of Indo-Pacific. How do you take the other countries of the Indo-Pacific together? And that is not just, and that is cut across several domains. So, for example, how do you partner within the Indo-Pacific to build resilient and trustworthy supply chains, for example? How do you come together to mitigate some of the challenges that the development template of many of the countries of the Indo-Pacific face in terms of the debt burden, etc. on them? So all that formed part of a larger broad platform of discussion insofar as the region and sub-region specifically and the larger field of Indo-Pacific is concerned. Uma Siddiqui ji, to your question on the defense security elements, the two prime ministers did speak about a very successful meeting of the 2+2, that is the defense minister and foreign ministers together meeting. I think it was sometime last year. But when it came to different segments of cooperation in the field of defense, Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi clearly put on the table that one of the areas of very strong cooperation between India and Japan could be co-innovation, co-design, co-creation. And these words are not put across in terms of these discussions as a branding words. These are words which have a very strong underpinning, policy underpinning on the Indian side of Atmanirbharta in the field of defense, and Atmanirbharta not as an isolationist feature, but Atmanirbharta which can be built in partnership with other countries. And in this case, that partnership and that partner, particular in this case being Japan, they did speak about what more India and Japan can do going forward. No specific equipment or platforms were discussed, but technology as a wider spectrum. How do you work on technology to move as bilateral partnership? And exercises I've already spoken about, training definitely, but there's a larger field of research, design, creation, and the spectrum of what you can do in the field of defense is actually very large and deep. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You had a question? No, sorry, you had Akhilesh, go ahead.
Sir, I'm Akhilesh Sohn from Sansar TV. As you said that you talked about G7 priorities and G20 priorities. So what are the converging points between the priorities of both the countries? Well, I mean the leadership of both the countries. Okay. And was there any unanimity of view on Russia-Ukraine war?
Sorry, unanimity of view?
Views on Russia.
Maha.
So my first question
Microphone,
is,
closer.
Sir, during the foreign ministers meeting of the Quad, the Japanese foreign minister had given a reference to the Beatles and spoken about how they can work together but also with others. Today again, we have seen Prime Minister Kishida talking about expanding cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. Has Japan expressed its desire to include more countries in the Quad? And sir, second question is not related to Japan but pertinent at the moment because there are reports right now that the Indian consulate in San Francisco has been vandalized by some Khalistani groups. Would you respond to that? Because we are seeing these incidents happening in some parts of the country. In fact, on UK, the DCM was also summoned.
That's not really in the domain of this, but I'll let FS decide. Oh, we had a few ones. I give you the floor then. Shashank, go
Thank you for your time, Foreign Secretary. I'm Shashank Mattu from the Mint. So the Prime Minister mentioned semiconductors as a particular area of focus for India and Japan in the field of emerging technology. Could you give us some sense of any specific investments that the Japanese are willing to put on the table, given their strengths in chemicals and particular parts of the semiconductor supply chain? Thank you.
Okay, Pranay. You got to be sitting ideally, but please.
सर प्रणय उपाध्याय एबीपी न्यूज़ से मेरा एक छोटा सा क्लैरिफिकेशन अखिलेश जी के सवाल से आगे ही है कि क्या रूस यूक्रेन युद्ध को खत्म करने को लेकर प्रयासों पर कोई बात हुई दोनों नेताओं के बीच में, और G7 का जो रवैया है वो G20 की लीडरशिप पे भारत में जो मेज़बानी में होने वाला समिट है उसको प्रभावित न करे, इसको लेकर क्या कुछ सहमति बनी है? और एक छोटा सा एक्सटेंशन सर इस चीज़ को लेकर है कि 2019 के बाद से तीनों भारत और जापान ने मिलकर तीसरे देश के अंदर डेवलपमेंटल प्रोजेक्ट्स पर कई बार बात की थी, तो क्या उस पर कुछ प्रगति हुई है?
I'll take one last question. Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, time's now. You did mention defense cooperation. Japan has committed, in fact, Prime Minister Kishida himself has committed to doubling the defense budget. If that actually happens, Japan will be the third largest spender on defense in the world. Now, keeping that in mind and keeping all the issues about cooperation that you've spoken about, is there any plan for Japan, or did this come up during the discussions, of investing in the defense structures in India and making, not just for India, but for the world?
I think
also,
sir,
sir,
answered that question, no?
No,
Okay.
not really. And also, sir,
Quick, please.
did the problem in Ladakh come up during the discussions?
Last question here. No, sorry, I don't have any more time. I had given you the floor earlier. Go ahead.
Tawqir Hussain from Yomiuri Shimban. Can I get the
Tawqir from
Yomiuri Shimban? Can I get the reaction to the Kishida's speech about where he presented his Indo-Pacific plan?
15 minutes ago, 10 minutes. We're reading the speech.
Yes.
Sir, floor is yours.
आप अपना रिएक्शन बताएं, मैं तो ज़्यादा उसमें रुचि रखता हूँ.
There are a few hands. If there's any other new topic, I'm willing to. Similar question? Anything? You have something on Bloomberg? Yeah, please. There's something just.
Sir, Shruti Ranjan from Bloomberg. Just an associated question with what Pranay asked. We're getting to hear a lot about cooperation between G7 and G20. Is it that, Japan is asking us to align our India's position more, and if so, what is the reaction?
Similar to the first question, no? I think that's very close to that. Nice.
आई थिंक केवल एक ही व्यक्ति जिसने खड़े होकर प्रश्न पूछा, तो पहले मैं उसी का प्रश्न उत्तर दे देता हूँ, ठीक रहेगा. तो प्रणय जी, जो आपका प्रश्न था यूक्रेन, G7, G20, समावेशी विचारधारा, प्राथमिकताएं, ब्लूमबर्ग का भी थोड़ा लगभग एक ही प्रश्न है. आपका दूसरा प्रश्न तीसरे देशों में सहयोग सहकार्य को लेके है. देखिए, जहाँ तक G7 और G20 का प्रश्न है, जैसे कि मैंने अपनी प्रारंभिक टिप्पणी में भी कहा, इस समय G20 की अध्यक्षता भारत के पास है और G7 की अध्यक्षता जापान के पास है. तो जब G7 और G20 की अपनी अपनी अध्यक्षताओं को लेके बात हुई, तो दोनों नेताओं ने अपनी अपनी प्राथमिकताओं क्या हैं उनकी, तो भारतीय प्रधानमंत्री ने बड़े स्पष्ट रूप से कि G20 की भारत की अध्यक्षता की हमारी क्या प्राथमिकता हैं, वो स्पष्ट रूप से जापान के प्रधानमंत्री के सामने बिल्कुल विस्तार पूर्वक रखी. इसी प्रकार से जापानीज़ प्रधानमंत्री ने भी जो उनकी प्राथमिकताएं G20 की हैं वो सामने रखी. स्वाभाविक है कि जब दो शिखर वार्ता के अंतर्गत जब दो नेताओं के बीच में वार्ता होती है, तो उन प्राथमिकताओं में साझे प्रश्न क्या हैं उनके बारे में वार्ता होती है. देखिए, G7 का जो एजेंडा है वो G20 के एजेंडा से भिन्न है, क्योंकि जिस तरह से G7 की संरचना है और G20 की जो संरचना है, न केवल देशों की संरचना बल्कि जो एजेंडा की भी संरचना है वो काफ़ी अलग है. तो लेकिन एक बात तो इसमें स्पष्ट रूप से दोनों नेताओं में सहमति थी कि जहाँ तक ग्लोबल साउथ की वॉइस का प्रश्न है, जहाँ तक उनके विचारों का प्रश्न है, जहाँ तक उनके वाणी का प्रश्न है, उन सब को G20 के एजेंडा के रूप में किसी न किसी प्रकार से शामिल करना ये पूरे वैश्विक हित में है. इसको लेके एक स्पष्ट रूप से चर्चा हुई. बाकी जैसे मैंने कहा कि जापानीज़ प्रधानमंत्री ने उनकी G7 की क्या प्राथमिकताएं हैं वो सामने रखी और भारतीय प्रधानमंत्री ने G20 की प्राथमिकता रखें। स्वाभाविक है कि एक अच्छा अवसर है कि दोनों नेता जो हैं न केवल अपनी इन संस्थाओं के प्रति उनकी सोच, उनकी प्राथमिकता क्या है उसको एक दूसरे के सामने प्रदर्शित करें, प्रकाशित करें, बल्कि अगर इस वार्ता के बाद अगर कुछ सहयोग समन्वय के कुछ पॉइंट्स निकलते हैं तो उसको आगे ले जाने की बात वो बात की बात है। लेकिन जैसे कि मैंने कहा दोनों संस्थाओं की जो संरचनाएं हैं वो अलग हैं। जहाँ तक तीसरे देशों में सहयोग और सहकार्य का आपका जो प्रश्न था, देखिए ये जो भारत जापान सहयोग पूरे इंडो पैसिफिक क्षेत्र में रीजनल पार्ट्स में, सब रीजनल सेगमेंट्स में, लार्जर ग्लोबल इंडो पैसिफिक सेगमेंट में, उसमें कहीं ना कहीं पे भारत और जापान सहयोग किस प्रकार से दूसरे देशों की सहायता कर सकता है ये वार्ता में निहित है अपने आप में। अब उसका प्रोजेक्ट का क्या स्वरूप हो, उस स्वरूप को आगे कैसा बढ़ाया जाए वो देश देश से भिन्न होगा। तो इसको मेरे हिसाब से एक प्रोजेक्ट के रूप में ना देखा जाए बल्कि एक कॉन्सेप्ट के रूप में देखा जाए, क्योंकि उस कॉन्सेप्ट से जो फिर प्रोजेक्ट उभर के आते हैं वो उनकी वो नाना प्रकार के हो सकते हैं और उनका मुख्य आधार ये होगा कि किस दूसरे देश की क्या आवश्यकता है उसके हिसाब से आगे बढ़ने का। अखिलेश जी, जो Akhilesh, your question on the G20 and G7, I think I have pretty much answered, which is that both leaders focused on their respective priorities during their presidency of their organizations which they are running, India for G20, Japan for G7. Those priorities, it is very important to develop a clear understanding of those priorities, of the perspective behind those priorities, of what the key driving forces are for those priorities, and see how those priorities can also enrich the discussions in the two platforms. So when my Prime Minister speaks about digital transformation, digital public goods, sustainable lifestyles, elements like these being the priorities of G20, not just for India, for G20, but also for the larger global South. Obviously, that can enrich the agenda for the G7 discussions also. So I think I have answered this in detail, but just as a part elaboration of that one. Mahaji, to your question on the, or rather your comment on the Beatles, etc. Look, I'm not musically inclined, particularly to the Western music, so I would rather not comment on that. But I think suffice to say that the question of expansion of Quad in this conversation did not come up. One. Two, all the Quad members are very clear in their mind that Quad needs to undergo a very, very appropriate phase of consolidation before we look to anything other than Quad. I'll leave it at that. With regard to the UK incident, we have already put out yesterday evening, late evening, India's response to it, in which the UK Deputy High Commissioner was summoned and was, one, demanding an explanation, two, asked to be asked the culprits and the perpetrators of what happened at London yesterday to be quickly arrested and prosecuted. We launched a strong protest and also clearly indicated to the British authorities for the need for them to put up adequate security at the UK High Commission. Shashank, to your question, I think on semiconductors was the question. You see, this as I mentioned, this domain of innovation, technology, manufacturing, the triangulation of these three of which semiconductors is one of the very important domains because it captures the research segment, obviously because of the very nature of the semiconductors. It captures the innovation part of it, technology part of it, and the coming together of the capacities of India and Japan for its manufacturing in India. Prime Minister did put forward very strongly, and I would add the related element of skill manpower, especially on the as available on the Indian side, how that interfaces with this segment. So this was an important topic of discussion between the two prime ministers. Not just that, it's also an important topic of important element of cooperation between India and Japan. We have been talking about cooperation in the field of semiconductors for quite some time, both in the research and development segment, 1, 2 in terms of modernization of existing segments in India, 3 in terms of tapping the skill base available in India for them, and 4th naturally in terms of investment which flow into it. Srinjoy, to your question, which I think is partly a continuation of Humaji's question on the 2+2 defense, etc. Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Kishida talked about, when they spoke about co-innovation, co-design, co-creation, one of the key elements of the conversation also was investment collaboration and investment partnership in this space. And Prime Minister Modi made it very clear to Prime Minister Kishida that when it comes to private sector investments in the field of defense, when it comes to foreign direct investment in the field of defense, those two sectors are completely open in India. The Japanese companies are not only invited but are also encouraged to harness the opportunity and advantages that are inherent in the Indian manufacturing ecosystem, the policy framework liberalization that Government of India has undertaken in the field of defense, link it to Make in India, not just for India, but also for the rest of the world. Also do it in a manner that the products manufactured here are part of not just regional supply chains, but also global supply chains, and also which helps in building trusted supply chains in the field of defense. I think.
You want to know what your...
Well, as I said, you have yourself heard the Prime Minister of Japan very clearly speak on his vision for the free and open Indo-Pacific. I think his speech speaks for itself. I don't think it's appropriate for me to comment on such an important policy statement by a leader of a foreign visiting dignitary of ours. Ladakh specifically did not come up for discussion, but the two prime ministers, as I said, did speak about challenges that both our countries face in the region, and also how we can work together to strengthen our partnership.
Thank you very. Not Russia. I think he did mention initially. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you also to Ambassador C.B. George and Joint Secretary and Dr. Shilpa Gambule. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you very much.